Okay, so again, this chapter 10, is speaking about other levels in the human being. We said that this book altogether is a book that aspires for the third level, the level of Benoni, which is the level in which we have an animal soul, right? We're each born with a divine soul and an animal soul. As Tanya says, we have an animal soul, but it's in full control. That level can be achieved by each and every one of us. The levels that we're speaking about here are not necessarily achieved by each and every one of us, because it's almost like a talent. You're either born with it or not. But just like a talent, you have to develop it in order to become it. And that's the level of the tzaddik. So there's the incomplete tzaddik, and there's the complete tzaddik. Here we're speaking about the complete tzaddik, the tzaddik that has no bad whatsoever. He's actually transformed his bad into good. The incomplete tzaddik has bad, but it's completely dormant, doesn't even appeal to him, right? That's what we were speaking about. Now, Rabbi Stern's here is introducing this idea in order to better understand what a complete tzaddik is. And this is the idea of what is that speaks really to what everyone has in their own conscience, or in their own thoughts, in their own, I would say, in the domain of the mind. Because at the end of the day, we each have our own boundaries, as Rabbi Stein says, and it's a very profound idea, and it's really a beautiful idea. Our own boundaries that are set by our own morals and our own ethics. Now, for the tzaddik, it doesn't even come to mind to make any type of evil thought or of even anything that's close to evil enter the domain of his mind, enter the domain of his consciousness. And he took he gave just to recap again, the example that he gave was that in our society, for example, the idea of cannibalism is, thank God, still an idea that is completely outside of our domain. But there are ideas like killing are not completely outside of our domain. Yes, we reject them, but we understand that this could happen. And it's not justifying killing, God forbid, or murdering, but it's almost just by accepting the fact that it exists, it cools off this great evil of murder in our eyes. It's almost like, just to use another example, and then we can continue on, but it's an example from the Torah itself. If you think about this, the first nation to attack the Jewish people after the grand exodus from Egypt was the nation of Amalek. The nation of Amalek attacked the Jewish people when they knew, the Amalekites knew, that it was impossible for them to win. God, after all, was saving the Jewish people from all harm. Not only did he provide for them the grand exodus and the splitting of the Red Sea, but then afterwards also in the desert, he gave them manna, right? He protected us with the clouds and so on. So they knew they stood no chance. God was protecting them completely. Yet they jumped into that war, knowing that they were going to lose, and they indeed lost. But what happened? What happened in the eyes of the nations, as Rashi, by the way, points out, after Amalek attacked our nation, knowing that they were going to lose, what happened is that now the Jewish people weren't so scary in the eyes of the nations. Before then, the people said God is protecting them so much that, whoa, we won't even entertain the thought of attacking them. Now that Amalek attacked them, they said to themselves, oh, maybe we can entertain that thought. Yes, they lost, but they're not as scary as we thought, because the proof is that Amalek attacked them. The example that Rashi uses, and I'm going to get back to what we're speaking about right now, the example that Rashi uses is that he uses the example of boiling bath. Boiling bath. It's so boiling that no one even dips his toe into it. It's so boiling. Then all of a sudden, someone crazy comes and jumps into the bath. Yes, he's burnt. Yes, he dies from that jump, from entering the bath. But now the bath doesn't seem as boiling as it was before in the eyes of people, because the proof is that someone jumped into it. That's what Amalek did to our nation. Now, in a way, this connects to what Rabbi Stauns is speaking about. We each have full control here of our consciousness. Everyone has the ability, indeed, to have what the Tanya calls in chapter 2, moach shalit al halev, mind over heart, to have full control of the heart by the mind. Tanya even says that we're born with that ability. Unlike, by the way, animals or any other creatures, we're born with the ability to have full control, but therefore we also have full ability to control what's in our mind. Now, sometimes we allow things to enter our minds that cool off evil, which is what Amalek did. Again, or that notion of murder that we were speaking about does. It cools off. It's something that we still abhor, but it's something that in a way is a tiny bit acceptable. We've allowed it to permeate our mind. The tzaddik, the complete tzaddik, doesn't even allow those thoughts to enter his mind. For him, it's as rejectable as cannibalism, like we were speaking about, or as anything that's still completely outside of our consciousness. That's how he treats evil. That's how much he to reuse the word, that's how much he hates evil. Or Havei Hashem Sinura, we quoted that verse last week, that those who truly love God really despise evil because it just, their consciousness can't take it. It's immediately rejected by their consciousness, not even tolerating a thought of evil, tolerating the thought of murder, to use that example. For them, it doesn't even exist in their consciousness. That's what a complete tzaddik is, according to the latest explanation of Rabbi Stans. But let's continue. Bottom of page 255. There are things that people would never do, right? That's where we're up to, Margot.
Correct.
Okay. So does anyone want to read? Anyone? Otherwise, I guess, Margot, it's your turn.
I'll read. Okay. There are things that people would never do, sins they would never commit, yet the possibility is not unthinkable. So the temptation, or at least the thought of doing them, might occasionally arise in their hearts. But every person has certain sins regarding which his heart is utterly pure, sins he would never even consider as a possibility, for which he does not even feel temptation. This is the complete tzaddik's relation to everything belonging to the sphere of unholiness in every shape and form. Such things do not touch him. He does not comprehend them. They do not enter his mind. His mind and soul are attuned to godliness and yearn for God alone. Worldly pleasures of any kind are inconceivable to him, and he fails to understand how they can be conceivable to anyone else.
Right, because his mind is completely somewhere else. He can't even relate to these worldly matters, and certainly not to sins. You know, speaking of minds that are completely aloof, I remember, speaking of Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary here, I remember that Rabbi Steinsaltz once came, when I studied in his high school yeshiva, it was in Jerusalem back then, and he didn't live too far away from there. Sometimes he would come by foot. And I remember that one day he came to yeshiva. He would come quite often, at least once a week, but he came with his garbage bag, and a full garbage bag. So someone asked him, Rabbi, why do you bring a full garbage bag to yeshiva? And he said, oh, I forgot to drop it off in the bin outside of my house. My wife asked me to take out the garbage. I forgot. But here was a man who was really transported. His mind was elsewhere. It wasn't in this world. He forced himself to come down to this world, to relate to this world, to learn about this world. And he was indeed a walking encyclopedia. But when it came to walking in the street, he wasn't going to look at anything. He was allowing himself to be transported to the heavens. But in a way, that gives us a glimpse into what a complete tzaddik is, that there's no relation whatsoever to anything worldly, and certainly to anything evil, no temptation whatsoever. If we were to make a list, if I was to make a list, I'm sure many of you are tzaddikim here, but if I was to make a list of things that are evil, that I thank God I'm in full control of, but maybe still tempt me, that list would be quite big. Because again, I'm not a complete tzaddik. I'm trying to be a Beinoni, and I'm trying to have full control of that. But the tzaddik, that list wouldn't even exist, right? So eating chocolate for pleasure is on my list. Can I control that temptation? I can try, but it's on my list. Just again, to emphasize this example, the tzaddik wouldn't even have that on his list. It's chocolate, all right. I remember one of the great Hasidic Jews, Rabbi Yoel Kahn, who passed away a few years ago. I remember meeting him in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, and I was there at the coffee station making coffee, and there was coffee and there was milk and there was a leftover vodka bottle from the Farbrengen of last night. And he takes the vodka and he pours it in his coffee.
Ah.
And I said to him, Rabbi, most people pour milk in the coffee. Why are you pouring vodka? He says, I don't know. The whole point of pouring milk into your coffee is to make it a little whiter. Vodka achieves that. So what's the difference? For him, it's like, oh yeah, there's pleasure in drinking milk and coffee. For me, I'm doing it for the color because I see everyone doing it. It's not even in his consciousness again. Now that's true for evil thoughts or for any type of evil temptation. And the tzaddik doesn't even have that list. And this is what Rabbi Stanzels is trying to explain here so beautifully. And again, I have to emphasize this. And again, I don't want to be monologuing, so please feel free to share your comments. But I want to emphasize this, that yes, we're speaking about the complete tzaddik because it's one of the levels, even though the Tanya emphasizes mostly the level of the Beinoni, because that's the level we can each achieve, the level in which we do have an animal soul, but we can control it. But the Tanya still speaks about the complete tzaddik so that we can learn at least some things from the complete tzaddik. We may not be able to be a complete tzaddik, but we may be able to be a complete tzaddik in some areas of our lives. And
I don't think he's a tzaddik if he puts vodka in his coffee.
No, I'm just saying, yeah, but that's to show the level of his detachment from the world. Just like Robert Stans is coming in with these garbage bag tissues.
If I did that, my wife wouldn't say I was a tzaddik.
Right. If I did that, I don't think my wife would say something like that. But these people are so detached from it. It's not, that's what I'm saying. It's not even in consciousness. Now, why are we learning about the complete tzaddik? Because I think that we should have those lists. Again, the complete tzaddik doesn't have the list. We should have those lists. And our aspiration at least should be, okay, I have this temptation that I'm in control of. In order to really refine my character, which is really the purpose of the Tanya and purpose of life altogether. Not only to refine the character, the Tanya calls it sometimes, we have to change our character, change the nature of our character, as the Tanya calls it. That shinui teva in the words of the Tanya, to change really the nature of the character, then we should have those lists. And if on my list, for example, as I mentioned, is chocolate just for pleasure, then maybe the goal should be to have full control, so much so that it gets out of my list, that at one point it will be deleted from my list. So we can't be complete tzaddikim 24/7, but there are areas in life in which we should strive to be complete tzaddikim. And that, I think, is also why the Tanya is teaching us about the complete tzaddik, so that we can at least eradicate some of these thoughts from our consciousness completely, expel them altogether. That's the purpose of this learning. Again, please feel free to share your thoughts. Otherwise, we'll continue.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes, please.
Are you born a tzaddik, or can you become a tzaddik? Is it something that God make you a tzaddik from birth, and you're born with these virtues, or can any of us become at some point a tzaddik?
Right, that's a great question. So, like I said, I think you're born a tzaddik. The Tanya says so. But again, it's not like you're born a tzaddik and that's it. You have no work or no refinement of nature, as we were just speaking about, no refinement of nature to do. It's like a talent, like we were saying. You're born with a talent, but then you have to develop it. Michael Jordan was born in the talent of basketball, to use his example. You can use any example you want, but he had to work on it quite aggressively. He was kicked out of his high school team twice, etc. He had to work on it, and eventually became the Michael Jordan that we saw on TV or live in person, especially if you lived in Chicago like Jordan did and so on during those years of NBA basketball. But again, that's what a tzaddik is. Tzaddik is born with that, and but he has to develop it. Maybe there are some tzaddikim that are born tzaddikim, that are born with that talent, but they don't develop it.
So there is no hope for any of us to become a tzaddik.
Well, yeah, but again, to quote the words of the Tanya, not every soul has a different mission. Not every soul has the mission to become a tzaddik. And most of us have to become Beinoni. And as the Tanya says, Ulai lekach nivra. Maybe this is the reason, the whole purpose of our creation, is to be able to control our animal soul and to subdue it each and every day. And that's the purpose. And by the way, I'm also, it's not me saying this, the Talmud says this, and even the Tanya quotes that the subduing of the animal soul by the Beinoni is in a way greater than the achievements of the tzaddik, because the tzaddik doesn't have to deal with evil. He eradicated evil. It's not, as we said, it's not even his consciousness. So for him, there's no temptation, and therefore there's no really victory, because victory can only happen when there's good versus bad, when there are two opposite forces. For him, there's no really opposite force, so there's no really real victory. By the Beinoni, there are victories every single day, hundreds of them. And those victories shake the heavens, as in the words of the Tanya, to use, he quotes the words of the Zohar, the foremost book of Kabbalah, that every time a person is able to control his animal soul and to subdue it, whether it's because the animal soul is telling him to sin, or maybe even telling him just to think about sin, and a person is able to control his temptation, shining light, to quote the Zohar, a shining light pierces the heavens and goes all the way to the throne of glory. That light makes the angels tremble, and in the merit of that light, many blessings are brought down to the person. If we would know the effect of just the mere act of self-control, I think it would be easier to do it, but the Tanya teaches us what the effect is. That light, by the way, only comes from a Beinoni. He has to deal with self-control. The tzaddik doesn't have to. So in a way, a Beinoni can achieve more than a tzaddik can achieve. If you think about that. Yeah. I wish this was taught more. I think it should certainly be taught in AA and in addiction programs. Imagine every time you control your addiction, you're creating a light that makes angels tremble, that goes all the way to the heavens, that shines, misofa olam v'ad sofo, to use those exact words, from one end of the world to the other end of the world. We don't see it, unfortunately, with our physical eyes. Our spiritual eyes, the spiritual eyes of the soul sees that. But that's the power of just one act of self-control. And every time we are able to control ourselves, we bring about much more light onto us also, which is really a powerful idea. Okay. Let's continue. Rabbi Yechiel Michal from Zlochov. Does anyone want to read? Bottom of page 255.
I'll continue if nobody else wants to.
No, thank you. By the way, if I may, just the story comes to mind, so maybe I need to share it. I think I've shared it in the past, but there's a great story in the Talmud, a very disturbing, in a way, story in the Talmud about this man who fell in love with a married woman, and obviously he couldn't just have any relations with her, but he tricked her. How so? He said to her, "Look, I know you're very poor. I'll lend you some money, and after 30 days, you can return me the money. And if you don't, then I can ask of you to do whatever I want." After 30 days, obviously she didn't have the money, and he came to collect the money, and he's there now, single-mindedly wanting to have forbidden relations with her. He knocks on her door. She says, "I'm sorry, I don't have the money." And all of a sudden, he controls himself. And he controls himself. And he says to her, "You know what? You don't have to pay me back." And he leaves. The man goes then to the marketplace. And one of the great sages of the time sees him and immediately approaches him. He says, "There's a shining light above your head. You must have done something special today." He says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm actually a very bad person. I had this temptation." And so he tells him the story. He says, "Oh, now I understand why you have a shining light on top of your head. That act of self-control is what created that shining light." Now, our physical eyes don't see that. I wish they did. But that's true. Every time we are able to control ourselves according to Jewish mysticism, and which is no doubt our guiding light, is that we create this light that shines from one end of the world to the other end. That's the power of self-control. Only Beinonis can achieve that, not tzaddikim, not complete tzaddikim. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's continue. Bottom of 255. Rabbi Yechiel Michal from Zlochov.
Okay, Rabbi Yechiel Michal from Slatkov, one of the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, was known as a complete tzaddik who possessed Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, a level of divine perception akin to prophecy, which reputably had been in his family for 10 generations. A wagon driver in his town once committed a violation of the Sabbath, regretted his sin, and approached the local rabbi to see what amends he could make. The rabbi saw that the man's penitence was sincere, and he told him that he should donate a pound of candles to the synagogue and his sin would be forgiven. When Rabbi Michal heard of this, he did not approve. How could a pound of candles compensate for the breach of a Sabbath? That Friday afternoon, when the wagon driver came and placed his candles in the appropriate place, a big dog came to the synagogue, snatched the candles, and ate them before they could be used. Seeing what had happened, the wagon driver was brokenhearted. He went back to the rabbi and told him that God has not accepted his atonement. The rabbi assured that it was just an unfortunate coincidence. If he would again bring candles to the synagogue the following week, his sin would be forgiven. And the following week, another mishap occurred, and again the week following, until the rabbi too conceded that something was amiss. He sent the penitent to Baal Shem Tov, who realized that Rabbi Michal had a hand in it and sent for him. The Baal Shem Tov's home in Metzibez was only a few short hours away, but the horses pulling Reb Michal's wagon turned off the road and got lost in the forest. Then an axle broke and one trouble followed another, so that when Rabbi Michal entered Metzibaz, it was late Friday afternoon and the sun was setting. And the tzaddik feared that he had violated the Sabbath by traveling on the holy day. When he came to the Baal Shem Tov, crushed and broken in spirit and beside himself, his rabbi called to him, "Come here, sinner. Until now, you did not know how a Jew who has sinned feels, how brokenhearted he is. Now you will realize that a pound of candles is sufficient." Rabbi Michal, who had ascended all the rungs of the ladders of holiness, could not comprehend how anyone could sin, how one could possibly rebel against God. What others know from within themselves, the tzaddik has to be taught.
Right, and that's the greatest deficiency of the tzaddik. He can't relate. Just like Rabbi Michal, you couldn't relate to the simple Jews' brokenheartedness from violating the Shabbat. He didn't even know what violating the Shabbat meant until he learned it the hard way, which is a very powerful story. But that's the deficiency of the complete tzaddik. The Beinoni has other deficiencies, but that's the deficiency of the complete tzaddik. And he has to learn about the world from the outside, not from within, as the Beinoni knows it. I do want to add that, the Baal Shem Tov, who too was a complete tzaddik, was in a way the antidote to Rabbi Michal in this story. That here is a man who was a complete tzaddik. We are talking about two complete tzaddikim. That's not so fine-tuned here in the story. The Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Yechiel Michal of Zlochov. Rabbi Yechiel Michal of Zlochov didn't know how to relate to the simple Jew because he could never even entertain the thought of violating the Shabbat. The Baal Shem Tov did know. And that's really the difference between one complete tzaddik and the other complete tzaddik. The complete tzaddik, dare I add, if we can add a sixth level, the tzaddik, which is the Baal Shem Tov here in this story, is a tzaddik that can entirely relate the brokenheartedness of a Jew who unintentionally violated the Shabbat. But that is something that needs to be learned by the complete tzaddik. Can be learned, but it needs to be learned. I think in a way, that's another advantage, going back to the Beinoni. That's the other advantage that a Beinoni has. It's to evoke the words of the Talmud. The Talmud says that that in the place in which people who did teshuvah are standing, even the complete tzaddikim cannot stand. It's such a high level that even the complete tzaddik can't stand in the place of a person who did teshuvah. Why? Because the person who did teshuvah came from something negative, but that something negative was transformed to something positive. The complete tzaddik never came from something negative. So he wasn't able to transform negativity into positivity. So the person that came from a low place really was able to then take that low place and use it as a springboard for growth. And that is what enabled him to elevate himself to a higher level than a complete tzaddik, because that complete tzaddik, again, never came from that low place. Now, and therefore wasn't able to transform it. But in a way, I think that's the advantage. We have the ability to transform this world like it's Beinonim, have the ability to transform this world, even like tzaddikim can't. And transforming this world, I also mean transforming human beings, humanity. Why? Because we can relate to them. We don't have to learn it from without. We can actually relate to them. We relate to their sins. We relate to their level. And by relating to them a level, we can also pull them out from their level and grow with them, make them grow together with us, something that the complete tzaddik can rarely do unless you're a Baal Shem Tov. And that in a way teaches us, I think, a thing or two about not just being a Beinoni for ourselves, but being a Beinoni for the world, which is something that the Tanya also alludes to. Yes, we have to refine ourselves, and it's about self-refinement and elevating ourselves and so on and so forth. But let's not forget also the others. And here, the story, I think, is coming specifically to teach us that as we are refining ourselves, let's try and refine others. And really, only the Beinoni can refine others more than the tzaddik, because the Beinoni can relate to the others with all of his imperfections. The tzaddik not necessarily can, again, unless you're a Baal Shem Tov. So it's the task of a Beinoni not just to refine himself, but to refine others too, because we can relate to the other. I'll just conclude with the story that comes to mind. Again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating it, but it's one of the great stories about the Hasidic world, that there was once an 8-year-old boy playing with a 6-year-old boy. They were two brothers, and they were playing the game of rabbi and student, and the 8-year-old boy is the rabbi, and the 6-year-old boy is the student. His brother is a student. And he came to him, the 6-year-old boy. Now the student comes to the 8-year-old rabbi with a question. And he says, Rabbi, you have to help me. I did this and this sin. And the 8-year-old rabbi says, oh, all you have to do is rectify it by doing so and so, and you'll be fine. And the 6-year-old boy tells the 8-year-old boy, his brother, you're a fake rabbi. He says, why am I a fake rabbi? I told you what you can do to rectify your sin. He says, because a real rabbi would sigh before giving the answer. He would feel my pain. Feel my pain, so you're a fake rabbi. And in many ways, this is what a complete tzaddik is about, or this is what a Beinoni is about. Beinoni can feel the other person's pain, and therefore it's not enough to elevate ourselves and refine ourselves, but because we can be on the same level of others, we are on the same level of others, we can also feel their pain and then elevate them from there, something that a complete tzaddik can't do.